Greetings, Padawan, says Jedi Mistress BRG. Welcome to American Realism and Naturalism. For those of you who had me for American Romantics, this is the next genre of literature that we talk about in the cultural American literature. But those of you who are brand new, no worries. We're going to talk about the Romantic period. We're going to talk about this period. So between the years of 1870 and 1910, roughly, we see the rise of the period of realism and naturalism. Realism really centering on literature, naturalism being more tied to the sciences, but appearing in literature. And these two movements, naturalism being a form of realism, are a response to the American Romantic period, which we just left. And that ended because of the start of the American Civil War. So just some background history in case you need a refresher about American history, tied a little bit to British history. There are three revolutions that happen in 19th century America, and you've heard of all of them. One is the Industrial Revolution, one is the Scientific Revolution, and the third is a Moral Revolution. And all of those things combine and sort of connect together to create this idea that we are no longer able to look, to the imagination and to have lofty ideas about our culture when such, realistic things are kind of going on around us. And so realism is a direct response to the imagination and the poetry and prose and the themes of nature and exoticism and how we treated heroes and how we treated ideas of the Romantic period. So Romantic period, which, spans a long, number of years, includes people like Whitman and Edgar Allan Poe and Nathaniel Hawthorne and Emerson and Thoreau. So the American Civil War breaks out. And so in addition to the war breaking out, now we see a rise in the Industrial Revolution and in the more scientific discovery, and then sort of questioning about morality and the nature of God and where God comes from. At the same time, in Great Britain, the Victorian period lasts from 1837 to about 1901. So across the big pond, we have this, this idea of the Victorian, which is in response to their prior movement, which was restrictive. So we have a lot of things going on historically. Now let's unpack the Industrial Revolution. So the invention of the steam machine, which applied to the railroad, most importantly, probably because coal and mining and railroad expansion and factories were spreading up all over the place because of the steam machine, right? So you have the cities are becoming overcrowded. Immigrants are flocking to the shores to get jobs in these factories, creating more overcrowding. These things lead to things like alcoholism and a rise in disease, right? So tuberculosis being probably the number one disease that was shared in close quarters. And poverty, right? So people are working for very little, working very long hours. There's a lot of children. There's no birth control. A lot of religious reasons packed out into that, but also financial reasons and the resources, and so there were large families living in cramped spaces, like in the tenements. So if we could capture the spirit of the Romantic period in saying that the Romantic period was optimistic, the Realism period is very pessimistic. So there's, this very heavy and foreboding feeling that we get from looking around at, especially in the cities, about what life is like in the cities. At the same time, we have a scientific revolution going on, right? So we have Pierre and Marie Curie, right, who discover radioactivity. We have Thomas Edison, and, there's lots of arguments whether he invented stuff or not, but for, for the sake of argument, he invented the gramophone, he invented the light bulb, right? And he invented the electric chair, right? So these inventions kind of, strike up not only just functionality, the light bulb. I mean, think, how transformational it is to go from a candle to a light bulb, but also the way that we bring people to justice with something like the electric chair. So there's that, kind of leads to our moral revolution, where we have Darwin saying that God isn't real, that God doesn't exist, and that's really, as he says in 1859 in Origin of the Species, he says it's all survival of the fittest. That's what it all boils down to. So, we have a lot of things kind of going on at the same time, and I don't want to forget to say that the scientific revolution also in America, we saw transcontinental train travel, right, and train railroads, and then the expansion of the West. We have gold mining happening out in the far West. So there's a lot going on, and so realism is a response to. We can't sit around and have these lofty ideas. We need to look at what's here around us now, and sort of the culture and the actual circumstances of people here today, the common people here today, and what they're going through. So realism is more faithful to reality than romanticism, and so they wanted to move away from that romantic illusion. So reality becomes a subject matter, common everyday people, how they speak, which we're going to talk about, which is called regionalism. So there's a different accent in New York and there's a different accent in the South. And real life becomes the subject of the stories that are told. Because after the Civil War, the idea, the romantic vision or the romantic America had lost its merit, right? Because now, there were a lot of people who came back, if they survived the Civil War, came back dismembered or didn't come back at all. And so these large families were led by women who had no rights, right? So there's just a very, a different set of people living in 1866 than lived in 1834. Right. And so the other thing that we see is a big shift, right? Prior to the Civil War, the cultural sort of center was Boston, right? So Emerson, Thoreau, that group, they were all up in New England. That was the cultural center. And that moved after the war to New York City. And New York City became the cultural mecca of the Americas. So because New York City was considered more modern. And so that became the place where everything took place. And then there was, sort of a review of kind of the things that were written during the Romantic period. And a good example, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, and it was a tract to get people to support the Civil War, to put money toward it, to put resources toward it, to end slavery, which is great and is one of the things that that kind of support led to the Civil War and stopping slavery. But in hindsight, freed slaves said, well, that's a really romantic vision of what slavery was like. Slavery wasn't like that at all. But here's what it was like. Let us tell you what it was actually like. So there was a call for more truth in reporting, truth in the literature of the time. Mark Twain, conversely, he wrote Huck Finn in a vernacular, which we call regionalism. The vernacular he used was sort of the language of this boy who runs away with a runaway slave named Jim. And the book calls into question some moral questions, like the boy, Huck says, should I be on Jim's side? Because his whole life he's been taught that slaves are less than, that slaves are inferior to, and that they don't deserve the same as, right? And Huck is like, I don't believe any of that. But am I going against, everything that I've been taught, and now I have a new thought? Like, am I morally degenerate for thinking that Jim is just the same as me? So we see we see Twain calling to question some of those things which we need to think about, we need to address. We have to unpack years and years of systemic racism, and Twain brings that out in his work. So naturalism, which shows up in literature, really is more of a scientific principle. It's sort of a subsidiary or a part of realism. And it really kind of deals with the science of psychology, the science of the biological science, and the science of social constructs, so sociology, right? So, and it's really sort of centered on determinism and materialism, and why that's important is because that means that there's no free will or free choice. So really what happens to people happens because of the cosmos, because of the societal structure or the political structure or the psychological, settings in which a person might be raised. And so there is no free will. You don't really get to make a lot of choices when your choices are limited. So we see that in the literature. So in the U.S., because of our rapid industrialization, especially in the northeastern part of the country, and the sort of closing of the frontier in 1890, there's just really this call for us to be more truthful in the things that we're writing. And so we see things like Maggie, A Girl of the Streets, that really sort of depict what life was like in the tenements and what the struggle was like for a young woman who's trying to make it in the world. And we see the benefits, but really the gross neglect of capitalism, right? And that's not to say that that there's a call for communism or anything like that, right? But we can see that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and then there's a whole lot of people who don't have any say in what happens to them because they're victims of their circumstance. The Great Depression happens in 1929, right? So technically this period lasts until 1910, but in 1929, not too long after, the Wall Street crashes and the Great Depression follows. So we see a resurgence in naturalism as a result of that, and that lasts until the Second World War. So the period that follows realism and naturalism is modernism. And that's a whole separate course as well. But that's so it goes romanticism, realism / naturalism, and then modernism. And there's some criticism of the realistic period, just as there is criticism for the romantic period. And one of them, the major criticism of realism and naturalism is that it assumes that reality can be known, right? Like this is what a reality is, and that the person looking at it is being completely objective. And so as you're reading the material, just keep that in mind, right? Who is deciding what is real and what qualifications do they have? And are they completely objective? Or is there something influencing their take on it? If you've had me before for literature, you know that I talk about the great big pendulum that swings back and forth. So a literary period will start, they'll give it a year, but people living in that period did not refer to themselves as realists or naturalists or romantics or modernists. We assign those terms because English professors need something to do on the weekends. But literature swings back and forth between thoughts of science and reason, and then swings through to imagination. And at no point is literature ever static or stopped into one spot in that pendulum swing. So you may have somebody who's romantic writing during the realist period, as we had people who were realistic, right, or realism people writing during the romantic periods. But that pendulum swings back and forth. And so definitely the Civil War kicks off this idea that we want to look at things just how they are, and that we swing more toward the imagination with the beginning of the modernist period that follows realism and naturalism. So key things to remember as we study together. Language is very, very important. The words that are used, a lot of authors are trying to use the language of the people they are portraying. So we'll see that in Maggie, A Girl of the Streets. We'll definitely see that in Mark Twain. We'll definitely see that in Kate Chopin. Like we will see how language is used. And just keep in mind, in sort of the back of your mind, what are we looking at? Who is the judge? And by what standards are they judging? right? How is this realistic, and is it actually a realistic portrayal? So we have lots of great things to read. I'm excited to have you here with me, and I look forward to a great semester. All right, be well. See you soon.